and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. Those joining us online tonight can tweet using the hashtag MoscowView, which is also located on your program. The forum will begin shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We're really excited to have you all here for another John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum, and sponsored by the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs here at Harvard. And this is, I think, a pretty special forum because we're, unfortunately, I would say, in historic times of a relationship that's in pretty bad shape between Russia and the United States. And this is one of the rare opportunities to hear directly from two gentlemen from Moscow. I know them well. I've known them actually for a number of years when I was in Moscow as the bureau chief for CNN. And you all, I think, have programs so you can read their biographies. They're very, very impressive. They're two of, I'd say, probably the most astute thinkers about the relationship and about Russia's role in the world. So beginning at the end on the left, we're trying to figure out whether there's any political significance to being on the left or the right or the center. So, and I'm wearing red, so that's another symbol. But in any case, Sergei Rogov, who is at the end. Sergei Rogov is the director of the Institute for USA-Canadian Studies of the Russian Academy of Sciences. And he has many other titles. I would suggest you read it. He has ample experience over many years, as does Sergei Karaganov, one of the, I'd say one of the most influential thinkers right now on specifically the relationship and Putin's thinking, which I hope we can get into. He is the dean of the School of International Economics and Foreign Affairs at the Higher School of Economics. So welcome, gentlemen. And just a little housekeeping. As most of you know, if you've been here before, we go for about an hour and 5 to 10 minutes. We have 35 minutes that we chat among ourselves. And then we will throw it open to questions, and we'll have microphones, and people can ask away. So let's begin. You know, we absolutely, I think, have to begin with Ukraine. There are many, many questions, but I just wanted to ask, beginning Sergei Karaganov, two Sergeys tonight. Sergei Karaganov, could you tell us what is the end game for President Putin? What is his objective in Ukraine? Everyone here, I think, knows what has happened in Ukraine, but where is this taking us? What is his end game?
No, thank you very much. I think only one person knows that, and that is him. First, from what I understand, there are several options. One option is, which is, I think, passé, which is to have Ukraine as a kind of an ally state with Russia. That was maybe the idea. Now there are two other options left. One is that Ukraine will crack vertically and horizontally. The society will collapse, the country will collapse, and what is being left will be then either divided or run by different countries. Or at best, we would agree with the Europeans to help them or to impose on them some kind of solutions helping them, of course, because Ukraine has proven to be unable to survive because of the lack of the state-building elite of many other things, impose on them some development, and so it would stay more or less intact as a country. Of course, it will then mean a very big political and deep political understanding between us and Europe, with the United States not hindering. This time, it looks like, I mean, there are many flows in there, but American elite looks, or part of the American elite looks as if it wants to make things worse rather than better.
Well, you've described, you say you're not telling us what Mr. Putin thinks, obviously, but you're describing what you see as a situation. But I still want to make sure I understand. What does President Putin want to see there? What is his objective? Because you know the narrative in the United States and some other places, which is, quote, President Putin wants to have a very weak eastern Ukraine, so weak that ultimately Ukraine itself could never really fully integrate into the West. That's his objective, to cripple Ukraine. What would you say?
Yes, that is happening, I mean, de facto, so there is no need to do anything actively. But there is, I mean, if we're not talking about Ukraine per se, the main objective of the Russian foreign policy on that direction has been for quite a while and is to stop relentless Western expansion of Western institutions, especially of NATO, on eastward.
Stop NATO.
Yes, and that was the original source, main original source, and the reason for the things which are happening in Ukraine, in addition to the fact that, as I've said, Ukraine had I mean, a bunch of problems of her own, making her a highly survivable place.
Mm-hmm. Sergei Rogov.
Stop. Maybe before you raise your question and challenge something which you've just said about integration of Ukraine into the Western community. I'm not quite sure that the Western community wants to integrate Ukraine because there are so many problems related to this idea. Besides, Ukraine is a very difficult situation. The country is divided. There has been a very bloody civil war. And if you really think that the West is suggesting that Ukraine should become a member of the European Union or the North Atlantic Alliance, I think that's not correct. And as far as the Russian interests in Ukraine, A, we want Ukraine to be a friendly state. B, we want Russian economic interests protected, since economically we are still very much interconnected, even in the present situation. C, we want our security interests to be protected, since we don't want foreign military bases very close to Russia. Just imagine like Canada joining the European Union, or some military alliance to which the United States doesn't belong. I presume the United States would have been very much worried. And C, we want the protection of the ethnic Russians, since ethnic Russians make about 20% plus of the population of the country. And I think that it is possible to find a solution. For that, we have to keep the ceasefire. And I want to remind you that it was Putin who 6 weeks or 7 weeks ago launched the ceasefire, stopping the offensive of the rebels, who could otherwise have defeated completely the Ukrainian army and move all the way to the Dnieper River. He also made it very clear that Russia is not going to support independence of Eastern Ukraine, and the political settlement should be negotiated between Kyiv, on the one hand, and Donetsk and Luhansk, the capitals which control the rebels, the regions which the rebels control. And Russia can help, but Russia apparently has no plans to implement in eastern Ukraine what happened in the Crimea. I think it's very important to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. Sergei Karaganov, you know, Sergei Rogov said the objective, one of Russia's objectives is not to have bases, meaning NATO bases, close to its borders. But actually, after this conflict, you have NATO probably closer to you than you might want. You have troops, albeit on rotation, but you have a lot more NATO activity in the Baltics and other areas. Granted, you know, Ukraine is not a member of NATO and probably in the foreseeable future will not be, but has this backfired for Russia to have NATO even closer and a more aggressive stance?
The issue on the table was very possible NATO membership of Ukraine, which was completely unpalatable. I mean, unpalatable casus belli. Could have been a casus belli. NATO membership of Ukraine, and we knew that once for sure. 2007, 2008, it was really not only contemplated but pre-planned. It nearly happened.
Pre-planned?
It nearly happened.
When did it nearly happen?
I will tell the story. However, I mean, it should have happened because around the Bucharest summit of NATO, and your allies, when they learned that they were ambushed, I mean, revolted, so it didn't happen. But we saw that this talk resumed. So again, about possible NATO membership of Ukraine, that was one of the main reasons why it was all done. As to the NATO activities elsewhere, I mean, NATO is a sovereign alliance, so let them be active. I mean, we are not afraid of NATO. I mean, flexing its very weak muscles.
Mm-hmm. Sergei Rogov, let me ask you, there's one, I think if you're in Washington, I almost said here in this city, which of course for me is Washington, but in that city down there, a lot of people are concerned about right now the unpredictability of what Mr. Putin wants, his objectives, where he is going. Now I know in the big world of politics, sometimes it's very useful for a leader or a politician to make it not very clear, to obfuscate a little bit about what his ultimate objectives are, because then your opponent is caught off guard, doesn't know what you're going to do. But in the real world, doesn't that create, at this point, some instability and concern about what Mr. Putin is going to do next?
I hate to do it, but I have to disagree with you again. And you know,
I thought you were disagreeing with Sergei, but anyway.
With both of you. I know Jill for so many years, since the days when she was working in Moscow, and respect you both as an expert on Russia and as a journalist. And I'm surprised when you speak about Putin's unpredictability. To my mind, he is very predictable. His strategic vision is clear. He wants Russia to be strong. He wants economic prosperity for Russia. And he wants Russian position in the international system strengthened. So strategy is clear. Tactically, he is capable of doing unexpected things. But my feeling is that many unexpected things happened during this crisis. The Ukrainian crisis started about a year ago when the European Union wanted to sign an agreement on association with Ukraine and some other former Soviet republics. And very quickly it became a zero-sum game. It's either one side wins completely or another side wins completely. And when Yanukovych was overthrown and the United States and Europe supported the new government, which legitimacy was questioned by Russia, then, well, you saw tactical unpredictability from Putin in how he responded to this situation. But I want to remind you that when the crisis started, Russia demanded, let's have trilateral negotiations on the economic consequences of Ukrainian association with EU. I mentioned Canada joining EU, so definitely that would be of concern to the United States. And then the European Union said, no, 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 it's none of your business. 2 months ago, they agreed to do it, and we have now trilateral negotiations between European Union, Russia, and Ukraine. And they're discussing hundreds of different economic topics and move forward. At the time also, Yanukovych requested that the economic terms, the economic plan for association, the economic part should be, its implementation should be delayed. And again, the European Union said, no, no, no. Now they agreed, and the economic implementation of the association is delayed until 2015. So if the European Union and the West did it a year ago, I'm absolutely sure that the entire Ukrainian situation would have developed totally differently, and at least there would have been no bloody ethnic civil war. Still, there are serious problems, but I think that Putin makes it clear what we want the situation to be. The US government says, well, we shall cut all contacts, cultural, economic, political, military to military, etc., until you return the status quo. And my response is, what do you mean by status quo? Do you want Yanukovych to be back in Kiev?
Sergei Karaganov, you're described as the author of the Karaganov Doctrine. I don't know whether you agree with that, but the Karaganov Doctrine, which is basically responsibility to protect. And that would be President Putin's responsibility, Russia's responsibility to protect Russians, ethnic Russians, and Russian speakers, the Sootechestvenniki, outside of the borders of Russia, most of them living in former Soviet republics. And could you explain exactly how far-reaching that goes? I mean, does that mean...
There are two problems. One is protecting Russians. I think every country has to do that, but what means? I don't think that should be done with military means unless, of course, there is a massacre. But that is then the responsibility to protect is basically even written into the UN laws.
Right. But
however, there is a problem, and that is with the Karaganov doctrine. And still a journalist, in spite of the fact that I dozens of times explained the origin of the doctrine. I mean, use the jerk with this term. I must say that is one of the symbols of this avalanche of lies which we have been poured by on both sides. I must say we never lied so much. I mean, when many friends were participating in the previous Cold War, I mean, we were more distant. In 1992, I dropped into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they were lamenting about at a seminar of the minister, young and experienced, and they were lamenting about the fate of the Russians abroad. I said, "Oh, come on! They will be our asset, not our liability. They will be Jews of these lands because they will take over."
Assets. They will be Russia's assets.
Of course.
Okay.
Because they will take over industries. I mean, they will be our allies, and so I mean, we have to support them. But I mean, do not think
kind of
that
like a soft power.
Yeah, and then of course the head of that particular kind of one small country Estonia, was approached by one of his apprentices and said, here is this phrase, and this is exactly around that phrase. And that person gave a huge speech on Karaganov's doctrine that I'm supporting, using Russian might to protect locals, etc. They need substantiation or Russianization for their statehood, for their policies, for military expenditure, I don't know. And I became famous in these parts of the world. I mean, even Council of Europe debated Karaganov's doctrine, etc. So, I mean, a few years later, I met this president, and I said, do you know that I respect so much your tiny country that I did not disclose that it was, it was almost a joke. And so not to humiliate you. And he embraced me and said, Sergei Alexandrovich, I knew your father. You are even, and I greatly respected you. You are even better.
Yeah, but well, let's delve into it a little bit, though, because, and Sergei, please feel free to discuss. The question, though, the focused question, whether it's to have Russians living abroad useful to Russia, influential, etc., or it is to protect Russians and Russian speakers who are under attack, being massacred, etc. How far does it extend? When does it get triggered? You know, do they have to be under physical attack? Or could it just be they don't have legal rights in some post-Soviet spaces and Russia has the right to, to use military force to protect those legal rights?
Let me remind you that after the Soviet Union collapsed 23 years ago, we had bloody ethnic wars, which were not much covered by CNN. CNN was showing Yugoslavia, but the war in Moldova, the war in Abkhazia, the war in Ossetia, the war in Karabakh, and the war in Tajikistan are still not much known. And more than 500,000 people died in those conflicts, and 12 million people became refugees. Since the Soviet Union, as a country ruled by the Communist Party, ruled by ideology, was not a nation state. And when the communist regime collapsed, all former communist countries had to deal with the question of new identity. So Poland became the state of Poles, Czechoslovakia became the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and we know well how the problem was resolved in the former Yugoslavia, if it is resolved. But for Russia, the situation is extremely difficult to my mind, and we have not yet formulated our response to the question of what is our identity. Is Russia the state of Russians? Is Russia a nation state? Russians, ethnic Russians, make 20% of the Russian population, 80% of the Russian population. 20% are Tartars, Ukrainians, Chechens, Yakuts, and 100 other ethnic groups. So, well, will Russia be their home if Russia is the state of Russians? On the other hand, 20 million of ethnic Russians live today outside of Russia. And Ukraine is only one example. There is a problem with ethnic rights of Russians in Baltic states and in some other places. So, well, is Russia, if Russia is the state of Russians, does it mean that Russia has to unite the so-called Russian world? I think there is still a debate in Russia about this issue, but I think, well, the idea of the nation state as a norm, and Zbigniew Brzezinski usually tells me, why Russia does not become a normal nation state. I think it will be a disaster for Russia if we become a nation state, because, well, then Russia will disintegrate. Is the United States a nation state? No, the American nation is not based on ethnicity, on greed, on religion, on blood. While there are nation states, there are many countries which are not nation states. And it doesn't make, for instance, the United States weaker, the fact that you have so many contributions to this American identity. So, well, I think that what we have had in Ukraine with the second round of the ethnic civil war is continuation of this painful process. How well we will establish our identity. And the outcome of this crisis, I think, in very many ways, will be decisive for Russian response to this question. Definitely, we will be sympathetic to fellow Russians living outside. But let's say ethnic Russians who live in America, they migrated to America. That was their choice for a new country. But many Russians in the former Soviet republics, now independent states, they never migrated. They were born there. That's their land. And unfortunately, some of the new independent states and the nationalist groups who come to power there, they really are taking measures which suppress linguistic rights, cultural rights of Russian ethnic minority. In Latvia and Estonia, you still have hundreds of thousands of ethnic Russians who are non-citizens. And I think this is a situation which invites trouble. And why Russia is trying to figure out what is our new identity, I think the leaders of the new states have also to do it. And that covers Ukraine. Because unless the rights of the ethnic Russians there are formalized and protected and the regions are given autonomy, well, Scotland has today so much autonomy. Why this autonomy cannot be given to Donetsk and to Odessa and to Galicia, to other places? That would be the movement toward, well, finally resolving the question, who we are. And unless we resolve, it's very difficult to resolve the question of identity. It's very difficult to us to decide what are our national interests if we don't know what is our identity.
But Russia has been trying to decide what it is as a country for a very long time. I remember in the early days after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the commission that Boris Yeltsin had to define the national idea, and I think that commission fell apart. So I guess it's a long-lasting. But let's get back. I just want to ask a question, Sergei Karaganov. I read a quote by you, which was interesting about China. You know, in this whole situation with Ukraine, Russia has been saying, well, we can get along in spite of sanctions by turning to some of the BRICS for support, you know, Brazil, India, China, et cetera, but especially China. And you said Russia is at last turning economically toward the rising East. It will be a great loss for Russians and other Europeans if this shift is accompanied by political, social, and even cultural estrangement. Now, could you tell me, I mean, it sounds as if you are negative in the sense, or perhaps you're talking about leaving Europe and clinging to China, but what do you mean? Is it a bad deal for Russia to be moving so quickly and pivoting to China, to quote a phrase, because of the danger that China, as a much bigger economy, could simply turn Russia into a source of natural materials?
First of all, I mean, I've been lobbying for decades that Russia turns east economically. And only during the last 2 years, we have started the process. Russians are sometimes stupid. And I'm happy that we are turning because there are new markets, and we have very many competitive advantages there, and we are, and we could use Siberia and Far East as a new source of development for the country and geared towards Asian markets. China is an unbelievable opportunity for Russia because not only for raw materials but for many processed goods, depending on how you develop your own country. And we have not been using this opportunity. So I'm in a way happy that we are turning, but the problem is that the idea was to become an Atlantic Pacific power with 2 bases. And now we're really facing a possibility of estrangement with Europe and with the United States to this extent, which would add to this very necessary readjustment and pivot to Asia, a cultural and political one. And that's why I'm concerned. I'm less concerned about becoming Chinese appendix, though there is a problem, of course, than that we will estrange ourselves economically, politically, but especially socially and culturally from Europe, and because Europe is the cradle of our civilization. And I'm not sure whether Russia civilizationally will be well off if we sever our ties. And at this juncture, when we're having this kind of a relationship with Europe and with the United States, I mean, these ties are being severed. All the more that there is a value gap between us and Europeans of a new kind, when Russians like myself and my predecessors were willing to join Europe, were willing to join Europe of de Gaulle, Adenauer, Brandt, I mean, of the 60s. And we ended up with joining Europe, which is post-European in many values. And that is a problem for us because we are a much more conservative society. But it's a complex, so this is extremely complex. But as to China, yes, there is a possibility that we will be overly dependent on China. That's why I would like to have a very robust relationship economic relationship with Europe, and we shall have it. But I'm relatively relaxed as of next 10 years because China needs us as much as we need her, because the Chinese strategists count on us in their calculations of inevitable conflict, hopefully not military, with the United States. And they need not now a strategic rear, as they were telling, but strategic base or strategic ally.
You know, part of the next couple of days here, as we discuss Russia, will be how Russia and the United States try to pull this relationship back on track. And I know that this is, a debate everybody is trying to figure out, but realistically, we could, of course, talk forever. I would say maybe the next 5 minutes, if we both could look at this issue of what are the concrete issues that you see, even in this relationship where 2 sides are not talking to each other, that they could work together on, let's say, 3 top issues. Sergei?
We have different scenarios. One is that the globalization will face a huge divide between the America-led economic coalitions like Transatlantic and Trans-Pacific Partnership, which don't include any BRICS country. And Russia, as a result of sanctions, is moving much closer to China economically, but also politically and militarily. And it seems that the United States already is beginning de facto move, and I will be happy to hear from my old friends how they react to this provocation. The United States is moving into dual containment again, not of Iran and Iraq, but of Russia and China. This movement is not complete, but there are some elements of that. Second point, we should not permit Russian-American relations to be a single-issue relationship. Because in the last 6 months, all those areas where we have common interests, like non-proliferation, terrorism, Iran, North Korea, climate change, etc., All that was pushed into the background, and everything is dominated only by the Ukrainian issue. We still have to build our relationship, manage our relationship, recognizing the disagreements, but also without linkage, the so-called linkage of progress in one issue to progress in non-proliferation or cooperation in the fight against the Islamic State, etc. And we should also preserve what remains of the arms control. I mean the INF Treaty and the START Treaty. And the INF Treaty is in trouble, and if we don't resolve this issue and INF collapses, then hardly, I think, the New START will survive. And finally, about Ukraine. If the United States can accept Ukraine, which is an independent state, but decentralized or federalized like America. The United States, the Ukraine, where you have different regional arrangements, and Ukraine, which is not a NATO member, I think, well, the Russia and America can cooperate in creating external positive background for internal political settlement within Ukraine between the Poroshenko administration and the rebels. But unfortunately, in Ukraine, we see too many tails wagging the dogs, because all those field commanders, all those nationalist groups, whether they're Ukrainian and Russians, they may be creating more and more trouble, and I think that we have to, Russia and America, have to agree that Ukraine should not be a zero-sum game, that we have to get a solution where everybody wins. Ukraine wins, Russia wins, and America wins.
And Sergei, I want to get to questions. Sergei Karaganov, I want to get to questions, but what is at the top, briefly, of your list in the relationship? What could realistically be worked on at this point?
Just take a couple of pills and relax. I mean, what we are doing? Yes, so yeah, some Valium. Yes, so that's exactly my recipe. I don't think there is a shortcut. Obviously, I have, of course, a shortcut, but it might sound a bit offending if President Obama sends a note to President Putin saying from the defeated professor to victorious student, because Putin did exactly what the United States has been doing all these years. I think Putin will laugh and will get back to business.
I don't know that that letter is on its way, Sergei. But still, just 2 seconds. Sergei Rogov mentioned the INF Treaty. That is a dangerous prospect.
I think that arms control, we have a philosophical disagreement with Sergei. I think that arms control is...
He has been opponent of arms control for many decades.
For many decades. So I think arms control, and I was extremely bitter opponent even of the reset, because I said that it puts into the central relationship a non-important issue, which puts us again, I mean, as potential opponents, while diverting our attentions from real problems being climate, Ukraine, food, water, Arctic. I mean, a lot of other things which are and were important. Instead of that, we, concentrated on nuclear arms control, which was of interest only to people like Sergei and myself and 3 others here in the audience, if I see correctly. It was who cares? And also under those circumstances, imagine, we were talking about zero solution, lying to each other, blatantly. while, I mean, modernizing our nuclear forces, I mean, like mad. So, I mean, INF could be, if we need intermediate range ballistic missiles, we should deploy them. It's not an issue. Because the whole body of arms control has been killed when Americans, the previous administration, not this administration, reneged on the ABM treaty. So that's it.
Why does President Putin keep mentioning nuclear weapons and nuclear countries? And it's dangerous, you know, for nuclear-armed countries to be. It seems like a threat.
Well,
why is he bringing this
because
up all
he's
the time?
wise.
He's wise. Why is that wise?
I mean, because he shows, I mean, where uncontrolled confrontation could lead to. And that's a good.
Let's remember that despite what Sergei says about arms control being outdated, we still, Russia and America, live in the conditions of mutually assured destruction. We possess more than 95% of all nuclear weapons that exist in this world. And while we cut and cut dramatically, we still can kill each other and the rest of the world quite a few times. And management of this situation, it is extremely difficult. Ideally, we should overcome it and move beyond mutually assured destruction into cooperative relationship. And maybe our failure to do it is one of the reasons of the present crisis, because, well, we declared partnership, but partners don't keep thousands of nuclear warheads ready to be launched against each other. And one of the reasons why I'm critical of the present US position, it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous to proclaim your goal is to isolate and punish a country which is still a nuclear superpower. Russia is not a superpower in economic area, etc., but in the nuclear weapons, we are. And that's why I think, well, we need to save the arms control elements to prevent sliding from what is a cold peace to a new Cold War. But if we slide to the new Cold War, we would need arms control even more, because arms control was developed and formalized by the United States and the Soviet Union to manage the Cold War many years ago. So, well, I respect Sergei's unhappiness with arms control, but I think that maybe, well, I would prefer to negotiate on the American side not with John Bolton, as Sergei does, but with Gary Seymour or Bob Blackwell.
Okay, well, on that note, I'd like to move to some questions from the audience, and I think we have 4 microphones. I see 1, 2, and I think there's one there and one there. So if we have some questions, if you can come down to the microphones, and as usual, identifying yourselves and making it brief and also making it a question, not a statement. So do we have any questions from the audience starting? Yes, sir.
Здравствуйте. My name is Fuat Husseinov. I'm from Azerbaijan, mid-career MPA program. Could you talk about some economic challenges that Russia may face in the near future and how it may or may not affect its foreign policy in South Caucasus and Eastern Europe?
Thank you. First of all, we didn't deal with one of the core problems and core reasons of this crisis. For about 8 years, Russian elites, liberal, anti-liberal, conservative, or monetarist, whomever, were unable to produce any kind of a workable economic policy. And I suspect that some people in Moscow, in Russia, decided, let's go for a confrontation so we would have a threat, and that would, I mean, energize us. By the way, I mean, Russia, through the 1100 years of its history, have been victorious, the most victorious history, have been doing well only under pressure. So there is a problem. There is an economic aspect to it. As to possible, the shock, yes, and people like myself are saying that, I mean, the sanctions should stay for a while, even if things should, because Russians should understand, I mean, the economic system which we created by default in the last 25 years is weak, and by the way, the sanctions are like a finger from heaven showing us the weaknesses of our system, which we have to correct. And as to the Southern Caucasus, frankly speaking, I do not think that there will be any major repercussions as to our policies towards your group of countries. We have been having, I mean, better and better relationship with all three of them, interestingly enough, simultaneously, which is very, very hard, because of the divisions within your group of countries. And I must say that we need a stable Caucasus, and more than ever. So I think Russian policies there would be, if you wish, I mean, more and more constructive.
Okay, and we have a question over there, please.
Hi, my name is Max. I'm a sophomore at the college. I apologize, I've lost my voice a bit, so if you don't understand me, I'm happy to repeat. I want to ask you a little bit about democracy and democratic institutions in Russia. So by the time President Putin finishes his current term, I believe he will have been president for 15 years total, not continuously. In 2008, Russia did change its constitution to extend his term limits. And you know, President Putin having been president for such a long time and extending his term limits so that he can be president for an even longer time in his now third term, seems at least to signal that perhaps the Russian government and Russian governmental institutions don't value too much democratic processes and changes in leadership. So I'm wondering, A, do you think that's true? And B, just generally, how important do you think these considerations of voting and democracy are in Russian government?
Well, it's a very good question, but let me correct something which you said. Well, Russia didn't change its constitution in 2008. I'm not prepared to claim that Russia is a mature democracy. And like with the problem of establishing a new national identity, building a democracy is something which takes time. Just imagine where the United States were 20 or 25 years after the American Revolution. And the process of democracy building in Russia is going in a zigzag way. We may expect, at least in my view, that Russia will achieve more progress in democracy building when we will have a large middle class. We still have a relatively small middle class in Russia. 15 years ago, the middle class, which was growing as a result of privatization, was almost completely destroyed because of the financial crisis and the default of the Russian government. Presently, the situation, I think, is not very helpful for the middle class development. And here again, I disagree with my friend Sergei. The economic sanctions have consequences, including consequences for the Russian budget and some of the social expenditures by the Russian government, like expenditures on health, on education. Just next year, health expenditures will be cut by the federal government by 22%. And assistance to small business also is going to be pretty limited. So, well, I believe that it will take a generation or two, and that may be an optimistic assessment, before Russia becomes a mature democracy. I remember how the process went in a zigzag way in the United States. It took a lot of time before democracy in the United States became what it is now. And even now, it's not ideal. And let me remind you that in France and in Italy, women got voting rights only in 1945 and in 1948. That's the time when I was born. So democracy, as we see today in America and in the West, is a one-generation experience. And we also see how well this experience is challenged by the threat of terrorism. When many things which were taken for granted 20 years ago have been reversed as a result of terrorist attacks. And I wouldn't mention that political correctness made life for smokers, not only in America, but in Russia, terrible.
You got a chance, Sergei, before, you know, to have a cigarette outside, but...
I'm counting
and
the
after,
minutes.
And after. Well, speaking of minutes, we have another question. Yes, sir,
yes.
your name?
Hi, I'm Edward, and I'm an MIT graduate student. You've spoken a lot about arms control and broader strategic issues, and I'm interested in a tactical issue of, we've heard a lot in the past week about Russian airplanes in Estonian airspace, and then more recently, the allegations that there's been a Russian submarine in Sweden. From a European standpoint, it seems that Russia is pushing us closer to the brink, and that something like that can be mistaken and it blows up into a larger issue. Is there another rationale that Europeans and Americans can look at these issues and better understand what's going on here?
Well, you hear a lot about it and you read a lot about it, but it's nonsense.
What, the submarine
The submarines? There is no Russian submarine there. The Swedes didn't find it, and there are claims that it could be a Dutch submarine or somebody's else.
Right.
And as far as a Russian aircraft, look, NATO aircraft is deployed in Baltic states, which is right close to Russia. And Russian aircraft is flying, but it's flying in neutral waters. So when you read that, well, F-16 fighters intercepted Russian heavy bombers near Japan or in the Northern Sea, that's simply a false message, because, well, the NATO or Japanese pick up their fighters to follow Russian bombers in the international airspace. They don't cross into the airspace of those countries. By the way, we have the same problem with American aircraft and American submarines. This is a reflection of a situation when we are not military allies, we are not military partners. There is a competitive relationship, and it's a pretty dangerous relationship. And that's why I think we need arms control, unlike my friend Sergei.
Yeah, I must say, but even more, we should stop lying as much as we do. As I've said, we never lied, even in the worst days of Cold War, so much. I mean, you couldn't believe your eyes now. I mean, most of the information you're getting about these things is false.
On which side?
On both sides, I'm saying. I mean, we are waging. Waging propaganda wars of the worst kinds, and because we are more informational societies than we used to. It's simply. I do not trust anything unless I could check. This is a very simple case, but I could give you, dozens on both sides.
Another question over there.
Hi, my name is Ruben. I'm a student here at Kennedy School. I would like to ask a question about the shooting of the airplane, MH17. Do you think there was any involvement of Russia or of Russian soldiers? And to what extent do you think it served or harmed Russian interest?
Yes, I'm referring. I've just referred to the old worst days of the Cold War. In my lifetime, these were, of course, Reagan days. At that time, if you remember, you don't remember. Some people remember. I mean, a resurrection, a popular resurrection in Poland was boiling, with some support from the United States, but it was natural. And Soviets were near an invasion. It was very bad. Ukraine. Then, of course, there was a similar fight over the pipelines. At that time, it was oil pipeline in Druzhba and a gas pipeline. Now we have several fights over there. There are many, many other semblances, and this one is another one. Of course, at that time, an American, I don't know for sure, but somebody sent a plane through the space of Russia, probably checking their defenses, and it was a plane loaded with people, and it was unfortunately and blatantly taken off by Russian Soviet pilots, yes. Soviet pilots. So this time, we don't know. This time, but we've had an avalanche of accusations on the highest levels. We simply, as of yet, do not know, and we know one thing, and that is that some of the data is being hidden. At this juncture, we know only one thing, and that is that it has been taken down. There are 5 possibilities. Rebels taking a land-to-air missile. There was accusation it was a Russian one. Now German intelligence says it was a Ukrainian one. Ukrainians taking it off there. I mean, some third force, because there are private armies there. So we have all kind of openings. It was a tragedy which was used blatantly and I would say immorally, just for political means. That's it. I do not know who is to be blamed. One thing which is for sure, and that is that the impotent Ukrainian government and the irresponsible Ukrainian government should have closed their space over the territory where there was fighting and where, for sure, a lot of planes were shot down, but these were military planes.
If we can keep it brief, because I want to get a couple more questions in. Sorry.
Okay, but well, I wanted to say that in both cases, in 1983 and this summer, I think it was the tragedy which happened by mistake. Since apparently the Soviets in 1983 thought it was an American spy plane. And this summer, again, well, if it were Ukrainian military or if it were the rebels, they were thinking that they're shooting at a military aircraft. And the rebels didn't have the sophisticated long-range air defense missiles, and the Ukrainians have. The rebels had a short-range air defense missile since they they were shooting at fighter bombers which were going at a much lower altitude than the 11 kilometers range with the Malaysian airliner. But it's very strange that the investigation is going in such a strange, in such a zigzag way, when now, well, 4 months after the tragedy, still most of the facts have not been released about this situation. And it said that it will be done only next year. I think that allows all kind of propaganda games to be played around this tragedy.
I think we have time for one more question. 2 more, okay. One, thank you.
Hello, Chrisma Jackson. I'm a National Security Fellow here at the Harvard Kennedy School. Question I have ties back to some of the arms agreements that were done with China back in the late 90s, that Putin came out and publicly rebutted the reverse engineering that was done by China at the time to gain some additional dominance in defense tactics and capabilities. Knowing that, and using the American saying of once bitten, twice shy, how are you going forward with the recent partnerships and the arms agreements you're going forth with today?
You love it.
You are correct. Well, Russia sold to China practically all off-the-shelf conventional military technologies. And we, of course, well, our defense industries were unhappy that the Chinese were stealing our designs. Well, they have a nice habit of stealing high tech from this country and from Russia. They spend a lot on research and development, and probably in 20 or 30 years, the Chinese will be able to develop these most sophisticated technologies themselves. Like 40 years ago, made in Japan was poor quality. Then made in Korea was poor quality. Then made in China was poor quality. It's changing. Made in Russia, it's still. Except our strategic technologies. And when I was saying that the United States is pushing Russia into Chinese hands, there are some military technologies which Chinese have problems to develop independently. Like multiple independent re-entry vehicles for the intercontinental ballistic missiles, like penetrating aids and a few other things. And I really wonder whether anyone in the United States in the present administration thinks about the consequences of the decision to impose sanctions on Russia. Since we are denied credits by the West and we are denied access to high tech, we will be turning to China. And the Chinese are not known for, the Chinese People Republic is not known as a great philanthropist. They are going to bargain very hard with us. And I think on the American side, policymakers will really start thinking whether you need to go into this, what I call dual containment. It still didn't happen with Russia providing China with this kind of technologies. But if it happens, that would be a very serious point in deteriorating relationship between Russia and America.
We have time for one short question and a short answer. Yes.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mahnur Khan and I'm a sophomore at the college. I was wondering, you've talked a lot about protecting Russian-speaking minorities in other states. What plans is the government planning on implementing in protecting minorities within Russia, especially after the concerns raised by FIFA and Russia holding the World Cup in 2018?
You're talking about...
Okay, let me respond. Well, there are ethnic problems and there are some racialist groups in Russia. And there are hate mongers in Russia, like in America or in Europe and in practically all other countries. And there have been some racist incidents at the soccer games in Russia. There have been some other unpleasant events. But I think it's a huge overstatement to believe that in Russia there is no protection for the right of ethnic minorities or racial minorities. Yes, there are crimes committed against them. And law and order is implemented. And let me give you just one example. Some of the Russian ultra-nationalists and Russian and actually racist groups have been supporting the rebels in eastern Ukraine. They had this Russian ultra-nationalist groups had their branches in Ukraine and they were involved. And just now they were planning a demonstration in Moscow. And the Moscow government refuses to give them permission for this demonstration, because the authorities are concerned that a nationalist demonstration can end in some violence and some attacks, etc. So, well, I don't deny there is a problem, but I'm not sure the situation is much better in this country or in France or in some other countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, the clock tells me that we have to finish. There's a lot more to talk about, and I think it's been very valuable for me, and I hope for our listeners and viewers who've been watching this, to hear your views. Thank you very much, because again, it's a rare opportunity to be speaking with somebody directly from Moscow who can give us a flavor and give us the thinking there. So sincere thanks to you, and excellent comeback.